Hi all, and welcome to the next session of the Start Network Assembly. We're going to start this session on Start Ready. It's now 2:30 UK time, so thanks all for joining. Very pleased to have you here. This session is about Start Ready. Does risk pooling actually work? The theme for this year's assembly is From Intent to Impact. So Start Ready launched just 3 years ago. And we hope that it's a demonstration of how the membership has moved from this intention or theory into impact or creating something really practical. My name is Mark Weegmann. I work at the Start Network team as a Start Ready advisor, and I'm very pleased to join you here today with Chiara. Chiara, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chiara Ambrosino. I'm the Climate, Environment and Resilience Advisor at Plan International UK and member of the Start Ready Governance Committee since it was launched in 2022. And I've seen it since the first risk pool up until now.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Chiara, for joining us, and glad to have you as part of this panel today. So Chiara, as you mentioned, you come from Plan International, who's a Start Network member. You've also sat on the governance committee since the inception of Start Ready. From your perspective, does risk pooling work for protecting people at risk or crisis?
That's a good question, Mark, and thanks for asking. In this session, we will go through some of the learnings from Start Ready financing mechanism from our second year of operation to answer this. But before we go through all of that, let's have a quick recap of what Start Ready is and where it came from. Mark, are you able to do that?
I will try, yes. We have a short session, so let's try to have a quick reminder, because you're right. Let's start from basics and go through what is Start Ready. Of course, this is just a very quick overview. If you would like to more, please do check out our resources and training, and feel free to get in touch with the Start Ready team at any time. So what is Start Ready? Start Ready is a pooled fund and a financing mechanism that's available to the Start Network membership. It's a multi-donor pooled fund with contributions from over 12 donors, but it also pools risk. This means it creates a single portfolio of different risks from different countries within what we call a risk pool. I'm going to show what this means shortly, but before I do, I wanted to state that Start Ready is made up of what we call the 3 pillars of disaster risk financing, or the 3 components of anticipatory action. You can see these in the screen, but I'll go through them. The first is risk analytics. This involves identifying a forecast-based model that's able to give us an indication or an early warning of a hazard. It's able to give us some kind of forecast of what that hazard might have on communities affected, and we're able to set a threshold for when the forecast would merit a response. So what kind of severity of crisis are we looking at? The second pillar is developing contingency plans. These are worked out across the membership, along with government and non-governmental organizations, to really understand what it is the risk, what the risk really is. Who are the vulnerable groups that would require support? What are the most appropriate activities? And what would be needed by them? Overall, it's a document for how we should better manage the risk going forward. The final component is on pre-positioning funds. So this is the guaranteeing of amount of funding that would be available ahead of that crisis is happening, and pre-position that funding so that if we receive a forecast, we're able to quickly release those funds to enable members to implement those contingency plans. So in essence, members collectively decide in advance what severity of crisis would release funding, for what actions, whom to target, where, and by which members. But back to risk pooling itself. This is a diagram of what risk pooling is. I'm going to briefly explain it, but apologies if it's a bit technical. I don't want to get too much into the details. Essentially, risk pooling is a method which we use and borrow rooted in the insurance and finance sector. It's a process which we group individual risks and combine them to reduce the impact of each individual risk alone. By sharing resources into one single risk pool, the overall risk is spread and it makes our planning easier. So we assess the probability of each individual event, each individual risk occurring, how much funds would be needed for that event, but rather than, as the left-hand diagram shows, rather than keeping those funds separately, we combine it into one risk pool. This reduced the risks of having funds sitting on standby where it's not needed, whereas in another country, a risk materializing, and that's where the funds needed. So it enables us to stretch the funds by pre-positioning more funding than we actually need, based on calculations of different events occurring and assessment of the likelihood that we're going to be able to spend out the funds. I hope that explanation was okay, but just to say that in the context of increasing hazards and uncertainty from climate change, as well as pressure on limited resources, risk pooling, this concept is proving to be an effective tool for us to stretch funding and better manage risk. Chiara, how would you describe Start Ready?
Yeah, so thanks, Mark. Thanks for giving an overview of Start Ready. So just briefly, there are three main aspects of Start Ready I would like to emphasize. So first of all, Start Ready is proactive, is a proactive mechanism. It takes the problem statements from a reactionary approach where costly humanitarian intervention are only deployed during or after a crisis to being proactive. The mechanism invests in understanding the risk, forecasting the hazards, developing community-led plans, and finally deploying action in anticipation to reduce the human suffering, loss of lives, assets, livelihoods. Secondly, Start Ready has proved to be efficient. Indeed, through risk pooling, the mechanism is able to protect more people at risk of crisis and stretch funds, enabling payouts or guaranteed funding in a timely and effective way, reducing the risk of the funds sitting on standby and maximizing the budgetary amounts used to support the communities, groups, and individuals most in need. Finally, Start Ready is locally led. Whilst the fund is held globally, the systems are built to anticipate a specific result in country and are all nationally governed and managed. This means that identifying the models and setting thresholds are context appropriate, using national models where possible, designing contingency plans through local and nationally based members with the communities and group most at risks, so to inform the needs and activities that are most effective to reduce the risks. The systems are then validated with subnational disaster management and government institutions. Additionally, the allocation of funds to members sits with the hub or national governance groups. Finally, the Global Governance Committee, where I sit, has a 50% representation from local, national, or hub members. It's made of members from 4 continents and is the only START network governance committee to be held with simultaneous translation. Another thing to add is that Start Ready is collaborative. Through the collective strength of the membership, we sit alongside the UN and Red Cross mechanisms, collaborating with them on sharing data and plans to improve complementarity of the humanitarian sector. So I hope that's answered your question, Mark. Yes, but it's been a big journey, a long journey, and we're still in the early stages. Yes, Mark. So here in this slide, you can see a timeline of the journey so far of Start Ready. So the network launched Start Ready at COP26 in November 2021, with the first risk pool going live in May 2022, with an initial amount of £2.6 million. The first activation was later the same month it was launched for Zimbabwe, releasing almost £500,000 for drought-affected communities to anticipate the food insecurity needs. By the end of the first year, we had disbursed £3 million. There was a slight top-up mid-year, reaching 300,000 people. A year later, we've just finished our second risk pool, and last May we launched the third risk pool. Risk Pool 3 is now live in 8 countries, with more than 2.5 times the amount Start Ready was launched with. In this session, we'll review the second year and share some exciting updates about what is it to come. But Mark, Start Network already has a well-established Start Fund. How practically does Start Ready differ from it? This is a question we get often, right?
It's a very good question, and one that we definitely get a lot. So there's a lot to say here, but I've tried to distill it down into a few points. And I thought maybe we could go through a brief comparison of Start Ready to Start Fund.
Let's do that.
Of course, to say both remain critical financing mechanisms available to Start Network members and complement each other in various ways. So in Start Ready, our focus is really at protecting people at risk of crisis.
In Start Fund, it's covering emerging unmet needs and focus humanitarian impacts from those unmet needs.
So in Start Ready, in terms of the funding, we, as mentioned earlier, pre-position funding ahead of any crisis onset, even ahead of this risk season itself.
For Start Fund, the decision-making process is slightly different, and we allocate funding depending on alerts raised, with funding being allocated within 72 hours.
So on Start Ready, that funding that we've pre-positioned the release is predetermined. So we set the threshold for when that funding will be released in advance, and that's clear and established so that when those thresholds are met, the funding is automatically released.
For Start Funds, we have a set of criteria for expert decision-making to then allocate the funding.
So in terms of the activities, the targeting themselves in Start Ready, as one of the pillars of anticipatory action, the contingency plans are developed well in advance of the risk season. It's done through research, through a lot of community engagement, validation with local governments and other stakeholders.
When it comes to Start Fund, the proposals with activities are developed within 24 hours of the activation of the alerts, with a flexibility to then adapt the intervention depending on the evolving context.
So going back to the risks itself, Start Ready, because of the modeling needs of the mechanism, we focus on climate hazards and risks that can be modeled. So these are risks or hazards such as cyclones, floods, droughts.
Yes, in Start Fund, there's not such a limitation in terms of hazards, and the allocation can be made for any predicted risk, both in anticipation or early response to crises as they develop.
Finally, under Start Ready, it's only live in specific countries which have already developed systems which are built intentionally with those 3 pillars of AA that I mentioned.
When it comes to Start Funds, any country, any ODA country is eligible with Start Network members. I think that's helpful. Let's go back to the Risk Pool 2, Mark, which finished in April this year, and see what happens.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Chiara. I think that's very helpful. Also to say, if any members or anyone else is interested in more specifics about the comparisons, please do reach out. We also have some colleagues joining online that are able to assist with answering questions in the chat. But yeah, Chiara, I think that's a good suggestion. Let's go back to Risk Pool 2 itself. So last month, we published a summary report. This summary report is our annual learning and impact report, which details what happens in each risk pool. a risk pool being a 12-month period, and especially what the impact was along with what we have learnt. It's a really great resource. I would encourage you all to read it if you're interested. We're going to do a bit of an overview, but because of time, we can just do a very, very brief overview. So please do look at the report in the chat. So risk pool 2, it started in May 2023 and finished in April 2024, earlier this year. We had a portfolio of 7 different countries and 11 different risks. Of course, these were all hydrometeorological hazards or climatic, so things like drought, flood, heat waves, and cyclones. And it covered the countries that are listed here. So we were, in this risk pool, protecting communities against any of these risks with systems that were already developed and approved for Start Ready. Over the course of the year, and this is including a midpoint top-up, we had just over £7 million in capital, contributing from 11 different donors, thanks to those contributing donors. With that, we were able to protect almost 700,000 people at risk of crisis. Through the entire year, we saw 9 different activations, which funded 16 unique projects and 16 members. We allocate these fundings into a few pots. All has the overall purpose of protecting people at risk of crisis, but we recognize that an effective system takes more than just releasing funds based on forecast. So the main mechanism, which holds 85% of the funds, is called the Global Risk Pool. This is the pot of money that we release funds from if there is a forecast of a crisis. So in this pot, we had 6 million in capital. And through risk pooling, we're able to pre-position 10.9 million. So this represents the efficiency of Start Network. And through this risk pool, we're able to stretch funds by 1.83 times. From the global risk pool, out of this 6 million, we released a total of 4.7 million, which reached over 220 or just under 222,000 people individually, ahead or immediately after the forecasted crisis through our membership, of course. We recognize, however, that it can be a challenge to implement some of these activities effectively and efficiently, especially when some of the forecasted hazards only give a very, very short lead time. So for cyclones, the maximum lead time we have of its onset is 3 days, sometimes even 2 days or 1 day. So it's very difficult to go from 0 to everything with 1 day warning. National Reserves provides guaranteed funds throughout the year that supports our members with operational readiness and pre-seasonal preparedness activities. So this can fund activities such as pre-positioning of distribution items, preparing information, education, communication materials, training of staff or response teams, and conducting simulations. So through this mechanism, we released £850,000 of the allocated £1 million. But these are just the numbers, not so much the interesting part. Chiara, what did we learn through this?
Yeah, so there is quite a bit of learning in the reports. So we're only going to summarize it now, but you can have a look and read it if you're interested to expand a little bit more. In summary, there were 3 main learnings on the risk pool number 2. So first of all, Start Ready proved to enable great coordination through investing in building systems and plans ahead of any risk actually happening. This, in practice, gives time to really map out the actors, develop agreements among the various actors for who should do what, and ensure that the validation processes have happened before then the triggering of the actions. Our research has shown that trusting the communities and local organizations is key in creating confidence, many referring to the contingency plans developed as everyone's documents. as evidence of the importance of multi-stakeholders and localized ownership. For example, in Bangladesh, Start Network members participate in the National Anticipatory Action Technical Working Group, developing shared activities and protocols and liaising with relevant government ministries. As part of the district level planning, development and validation of plan is done with the District Disaster Management Committee and government representatives, as well as UN agencies, Bangladesh Red Crescent Society, and other civil society actors. Secondly, evidence has shown that Start Ready is locally led, with local NGOs deeply involved in Start Ready program design, partnering with international NGOs and leading program implementation. Local NGOs are also playing key decision-making roles in program committees and global governance. This is evidenced through 88% of all projects demonstrating that communities are engaged in all stages of project life cycle. Additionally, community targeting has been reported by at-risk communities to be fair and transparent. So that's a great outcome from the analysis. Finally, the work of building systems helped to strengthen and align humanitarian action with local disaster risk management processes. This has been demonstrated through investing in contingency planning and risk assessment and supporting those departments to proactively plan for the predictable crisis that Start Ready focuses on. In this way, we work toward institutionalizing anticipatory action and building capacity of local disaster management agencies. But of course, there is still a lot to work on. And there were some important learning that came up of the analysis. These are aspects we are taking forward to work on this current risk pool and also moving forward after this current risk pool. Again, just a brief snapshot and giving you some four main learnings here, but I'll point you to the report if you want to learn and understand a bit more. So some further learning included the fact that successful anticipatory action depends on operational readiness and a lot of organizational preparedness. We must ensure that all parts of the value chain of anticipatory action understand the risk and forecast, are part of the planning, and have the investment needed to scale up when needed. This is from the funding release to the forecast monitoring and validation to the supply chain and logistics, including the teams on the ground delivering the interventions. Secondly, while system ownership is national, there is still more we need to do to fully enable locally led anticipatory action. This includes ensuring that direct funds can pass to members and that they have the resources to promptly implement. With the evolution of the network and new members coming on board, we must ensure that there is adequate training and resources to enable them to participate meaningfully in the system. Likewise, the DRF system is dependent on statistical technical models and forecasting tools. Through locally led systems means these models being owned and monitored at the national level, using national data sets and forecasts, as well as triangulating those forecasts with local data, observation, indigenous and traditional knowledge. Third, whilst we are supporting coordination of system with the wider framework, we must continue to invest in ensuring that our projects and programs complement other disaster risk management activities. This includes how anticipatory action and early response sits alongside DRR, long-term development intervention, and social protection for meaningful impacts, and continuing to work alongside stakeholders for effective pre- and post-disaster support. Finally, we should continue to harness the opportunities for AA and contingency plannings to enable positive early action behavior by addressing determinants of these behaviors. A piece of research stated that belief system, worldviews, and social norms are factors that should be considered, along with clear contextualization and fostering trust. To ensure effective outcomes where communities are protected, local actors need to co-design with locally determined decision-making protocols for the disaster risk financing model, which in turn will ensure people-centered early warning systems are locally owned and designed. So again, this is just a snapshot. The whole report goes into more details on these points, but also shows learning from each individual activation. So whilst we don't have time to go through everything, Mark, maybe we can show us, you can show us a closer look at how some of this works in practice.
I think that's a great idea. Thanks, Chiara. And yeah, some really interesting learnings there. I must make time to read the full report. So I agree. Let's try and bring this to life a little bit and take a deeper dive into one system in particular. So the Philippines cyclone system. The Philippines, I'm sure many of those on the call will already know, but experiences an average of 20 tropical cyclones a year, of which, again, on average, 5 bring destruction. We're currently in the process of seeing some of those destructive cyclones at the moment. Whilst there has been big improvements in the national early warning systems, disaster management, and risk reduction activities, particularly since the devastating Typhoon Yolanda, it still remains highly vulnerable to cyclones. And part of this is due to localized environmental degradation as well as rapid population growth. Furthermore, we know climate change is increasing the frequency and the severity of cyclones. START Network members began developing a disaster risk financing system to improve the management of this risk back in 2021, I think. And this evolved out of successful collaboration and coordination between members, particularly within the START Fund. They came together to build a strategy, governance group, and began the design and the development of a system. This included aspects that I mentioned earlier, so identifying an appropriate impact-based model. Through this, they worked very closely with the Red Cross to align models. They identified targeted regions, discussing and agreeing with UN and Red Cross counterparts to ensure that there is complementarity of the system and interventions, and developed district-level contingency plans. So this involved working a lot with local government units and communities to design interventions. We saw the first activation of the Philippines DRF cyclone system in Risport 2 in July 2023 for the forecasted cyclone Igay impacting the Cagayan region. Through this, we released £360,000 to reach almost 30,000 people in advance and in the days after the cyclone. Before the onset of the cyclone, we activated 2 days in advance, and our members initiated cash transfer programming to enable community members to purchase items, which they used to protect their assets, to have food, water, medicine, which was all vital for enduring the disruption that followed the cyclone. Additionally, the prices of key items increased after the cyclone due to market disruption, so having the cash and being able to purchase things beforehand was really, really vital. These cash transfers, whilst critical and impactful, however, were not enough to fully mitigate all of the negative impacts. And so funding, therefore, was also released to enable early response activities. This really shows the need for a continuum of activities for comprehensive support to community members, from anticipatory action to early response, and in the future linking up to longer term DRR, preparedness, as well as recovery. Under these early response activities, our members did things like providing hygiene kits, providing protection technical support, as well as support to people living with disabilities to enable their mobility. The system activated within 24 hours, and the consortium members were able to effectively implement immediately following a lot of the work that they've done through simulations and coordination with local government units. We wanted to have a member from one of these implementing organizations to join, but unfortunately, due to the time difference, and as mentioned briefly, the members are currently engaged in a live activation as we speak. We were unfortunately unable to have someone join on the call. However, we do have a colleague that's able to answer questions in the chat if there are any. And we also have a video which we want to show, hopefully to bring it to life. So this is not a video of the activation itself. I'll just pass on to my colleague to help share the video. But this is actually a video of a simulation of the system. It's a video that shows kind of like what an activation would look like, but also how we invest in ensuring that the system is ready through doing things like simulation throughout the year.
Ngayon na naranasan ko yung nagbagyo kasi hindi natin alam yung panahon na paiba-iba yung panahon. Kailangan may ano tayo sa pamilya natin, yung maibibigay sa maano sa bulsa natin. Ngayon, nagpapasalamat ako na nakasalin ako sa care.
So as mentioned, that was a simulation, but it gives an example of what an activation looks like. However, it also shows the importance of what I mentioned earlier about ensuring that the systems are operationally ready and prepared ahead of the season through national reserves, and the ongoing maintenance work to ensure that the system is set up efficient, and going to work well when we get that forecast of a crisis. I think the video also brought to life how critical it is to work with and through local communities, and how critical it is for those communities themselves to really own those contingency plans. I think this has been critical for the success of the activation that we saw back last year, as well as the activation that we're currently seeing at the moment. Meaningful community engagement, ensuring plans are owned by community members, speak to their needs, and the validation or working very closely with local government units throughout the year, not just at the times of crisis, is really critical for the effectiveness of this system. Okay, going back to the activation itself, Chiara, were there any other relevant outputs or learnings?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So recently, through our work in developing a toolkit to ensure protective, equitable, and inclusive outcomes from anticipatory action for the most at risk and marginalized groups and individuals, we reviewed how Start Ready and other anticipatory action mechanisms can, if done well, provide more intentional protection, gender, and inclusion integration. One of the strengths of Start Ready is that it helps reinforce members' own mandates and technical strengths. In the activation that Mark mentioned, the lead implementing agency, HI, and partners were able to meaningfully ensure inclusion was part of the project at every stages. Here's a video next that we will show of two OPD members, Beverly Batung and Lorna Padre, talking about their experiences. So if you can help me share the video.
Nagbigay po kami ng mga wash kits, nag-assist sa mga physical therapists na nagbigay ng mga assistive devices, and then nagbigay ng mga tumulong sa pack ng mga supplies para ibigay sa mga community po.
And then nag-distribute po kami ng multi-purpose cash transfer kasama po ang LGU po. Gumamit po kami ng mga tools, gayon din yung guide question upang makakuha po kami ng tamang informasyon at datos po sa komunidad.
Tumulong din po kami sa mga focus group discussion para sa mga vulnerable sectors at nag-conduct din po kami ng interview para sa mga individuals.
At gayon din po na nag-conduct po kami ng house-to-house interview po.
Na-involve po ang mga vulnerable sectors tulad ng
older person with disabilities, indigenous people, solo parent, fisher folks, farmers.
Sa mga consultations at focus group discussions. First time po namin ma-offeran ng work as OPD.
Ito po yung na-develop yung aming characters bilang OPD. At gayon din po na dati po kami po yung nabibigyan ng tulong, ngayon naman tumutulong din po kami sa komunidad. At sa aming pamilya din, dati kami yung nabibigyan ng tulong, ngayon naman ay natutulungan din aming pamilya.
Nag-challenges naman po, pinagkamalan po kami mga scammers. And then, ganun pa yung time na pupunta pa lang po kami sa bahay, ayaw na po nila magpapa-interview. Pero nung mga gusto na po nila magpa-interview po.
Sa amin din, dati po kami dinidiscriminate bilang mga OPD. Pero nandiyan na po yung DRF Cagayan Consortium. Dito po yung pinakita po namin sa iba na kung ano po yung kaya ng normal na tao, kaya din po namin bilang isang OPD.
Wow, thanks for that video. Thanks, Chiara, and thanks to HI, particularly to Lorna and Beverly for that very impactful statement. I think it's really amazing to see some of the activations and how it's brought to life, particularly through organizations fulfilling their own mandates and really delivering that through communities at risk. Again, apologies that we weren't able to bring anyone directly from the activation itself to speak, but hopefully these videos helped bring it to life a bit more, and most importantly has encouraged your interest in Start Ready to see more of the work that we are doing and have done. So I'm aware we're short for time. We've just got 10 minutes left. So we provided you with a bit of an overview of what we've done, what we've seen, what the impact we've seen, and some of the learnings. We just wanted to leave you in the last 10 minutes with a quick update to where we are now and what we're planning to do. So where are we now? Well, as mentioned, each year we have a risk pool. We told you about risk pool 2. We are now in risk pool 3, actually halfway through risk pool 3. So risk pool 3, it contains 8 countries and 13 risks. We have a total capital of 7 million at the moment, but we are currently going through a midpoint review process. So that's where we're going to top up and add further capital. Actually, we'll be doing that next week. So Chiara, thanks in advance for your time on the governance committee. But where we stand at the moment, we have 7 million in capital, of which 5.9 million is in the global risk pool. We're able to stretch those funds by 1.65 ratio. So we have pre-positioned 9.7 million. With that, we're protecting almost 700,000 people from crisis. We also have the complementary mechanism, so that's national reserves, basis risk, and this year we are also reinsuring the pool. I won't go into too much detail about that yet, but we hope to be able to release more information about it shortly. That's where we're at now. But of course, those are just the statistics, and there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes and sometimes in front of the scenes of Start Ready itself. I'm just picking out some of the key points that I think might be of interest to those on the call. Of course, we are halfway through our 3rd year, but we have big plans for Start Ready, right? And I hope the membership does too. So as part of our strategy, we are planning to grow Start Ready. That's written into our next 3-year strategy. And that means growing the funds both in terms of resources, so amount of capital, but also in terms of the number of systems and number of countries. We have planned expansion, but to do so at kind of like a manageable or moderate level. So part of that is developing a strategy for expansion, or what is a kind of criteria for how Start Ready goes into new contexts, so to go beyond the current 8 or 9 portfolio of countries. We're developing a strategy and we're getting a lot of internal consultation. Our plan is to bring this to the membership in the in-person assembly that's happening in December in Bangkok. So I'd really encourage those who are in this call who are interested in Start Ready, either if you're going to Bangkok yourself or via your member rep who is going to Bangkok, please do engage with us on this and join that session if that's something that is of interest to you. Of course, for those that are unable to, we will do some more formal external communication subsequently. Additionally, of course, Chiara mentioned that we had a lot of learnings and things to pick up from risk pool 2. So we have a lot of work on the background within each individual country system, as well as globally of the fund itself. So this is things like strengthening quality assurance, strengthening the structuring of fund process itself, improving program quality, and ensuring that we are really reaching those most at risk. We also go through post-season reviews. So this looks at the model. Is there anything we need to tweak or change in the thresholds? Are there any data sets that need updating? Should we expand some of the geographical coverage of the systems? Things like this are happening all the time behind the scenes. And the final point to say is that at the end of the 3rd risk pool, Start Ready would have been live for 3 years. This we kind of consider our pilot, and so we're planning to do a 3-year evaluation. Of course, the results of that will communicate widely, but it will start after the end of the 3rd risk pool. So I think those are some of the key things to draw attention to. And that's more or less all we have time for. So I think there's a bit of a break, but don't forget to rejoin at 3:30 UK time for the next session. It's a very exciting keynote on how can we make this century the century of the citizen. Before we close though, Chiara, do you have any closing words?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. We just wanted to thank you everyone for joining the session. all the technical supports, translations, Start Ready committee, the donors, and all the members involved in Start Ready. It's been great to share with you the progress of Start Ready and some of the achievements that we have made to date, as well as some of the learnings and improvements that we are planning in the future. So we are excited to share how this goes and understand we touched on a lot of information today and details. It's also rather technical and complex. It might sound rather technical and complex. So please do reach out for any further information. But thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chiara.